The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Quigley, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I have had the privilege of representing Ukrainian Village in Chicago for over 10 years, and in that time, we have become friends. From my friends, I have learned about the beauty of Ukrainian history, culture, and the courage and strength of the Ukrainian people. In the past days, the whole world has seen that strength and courage. Ukraine has bravely beaten back the onslaught of premeditated invasion by an evil autocratic leader. In response, there has been an outpouring of support from the entire world. But as I rise today, Madam Speaker, because our thoughts and prayers are not enough. Of course, those expressions of support matter. They hearten a resistance that is outgunned and outnumbered. And they tell the Kremlin that the world is watching. But when you are at war, you need more than just thoughts and prayers. The people of Ukraine need us to use every tool at our disposal to help them repel Russia's invading forces. I know many Americans want our country to stay out of this conflict. We have endured 2 years of a pandemic that has taken thousands of lives and stretched pocketbooks to their breaking point. No one wants a conflict that could make our lives even more difficult. I understand the desire to hunker down and wait for it to go away. But the message is this: you can turn off your TV and try to ignore the crisis, but that will not stop it from having an impact on you. While it may seem like the battlefields are a world away, the repercussions of this fight are on our doorstep. The reality is that this conflict will worsen supply chain issues and increase inflationary pressures. And anyone who believes that Putin will not turn his attentions to the rest of the world is badly mistaken. Indeed, he already has. He is already responsible for massive cyber attacks against the United States and interfered in 2 of our elections. Let's remember, 2 generations of Americans fought for a new world order in which democracy prevailed over autocracy. For more than 6 decades, that victory has held. Now it is threatened by Vladimir Putin. We must ensure that the sacrifices of our forebears were not in vain. Surely other autocrats with desires to carve out expanded borders at the expense of sovereign democracies are watching the extent of Western resolve. Ukrainian President Zelensky has begged the West for military aid. The U.S. must hear these pleas. Thankfully, the response has begun. President Biden recently authorized an additional $350 million defense aid package for Ukraine, bringing the total commitment of U.S. security assistance to $1 billion this year alone. And NATO has begun to send weapons and equipment for the first time in history. The European Union is shipping arms to Ukraine. Germany is supplying anti-tank weapons and missiles. Belgium, Poland, the Netherlands, and others have joined. While we are inspired by the Ukrainian military's ability to hold firm, they need more help to keep the Russian onslaught at bay. As co-chair of the Congressional Ukraine Caucus, I've spent months calling for harsh sanctions against Russia in addition to military aid. I am relieved to see many of these sanctions being imposed. President Biden has led a historic response in which the West has presented a united front on behalf of Ukraine. Every wave of sanctions has come from a coalition of states, halting Nord Stream 2, imposing sanctions on Putin and his allies, and kicking a number of Russian banks out of the SWIFT system. These are all important steps, yet more needs to be done. I know some of our allies are hesitant to impose economic penalties that may harm the Russian people. Indeed, the Russian people are not the enemy. Like the Ukrainians, they have been dragged into this war through no choice of their own. Unfortunately, it is clear that Putin will not truly feel the consequences of his actions unless sanctions impact the entire nation of Russia. It is time to impose the harshest sanctions available. Some leaders have said that we should wait to impose more. My question to them is, if not now, when? Ukrainians are dying in defense of their country. As we speak, their capital is surrounded by Russian forces. 500,000 Ukrainians have already fled their homes. Soldiers have died, civilians have been killed, children have been murdered. The time for action is now. Madam Speaker, I have visited Ukraine many times. I've seen the beauty of their fields, the blue of their sky. I've shaken hands with their people, heard their praise of democracy, and stood next to their leaders. The Ukrainian spirit I saw this weekend in rallies in Chicago is the same Ukrainian spirit I saw in Kyiv when I visited shortly after the Maidan. Just 2 years ago, I met with the mayor of Kyiv right here in this building. We shared stories about the cities we represent, Chicago and Kyiv, sister cities. I promised during that meeting that U.S. would always stand with Ukraine. We must live up to that promise. Until we do, Slava Ukraini. And I yield back.